Hello and welcome to the studio. Today I've got a very special guest, a lovely lady called Lydia Wright, who's here to give her testimony, and a very powerful one it is too. So welcome to the studio, Lydia.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Lovely
it's good to be here.
Thank you. Well, would you like to start by giving us a bit of background, the detail of your family life growing up?
So I grew up, I don't really remember the bit in Stroud where I was born, but when I was 5, we moved over to France because my parents felt called to go to Africa, and they actually went out with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so from the age of 6, I lived firstly in a place called Ouagadougou, which was the capital of Burkina Faso, or then it was known as Haute-Volta. And then we moved out to the bush, which was 50 miles from absolutely nowhere. And my father built a horticultural school from scratch and taught the Africans how to irrigate because the rains often didn't come. And so we were actually there for a total of 6 years in the end. We only had to return because of a military coup and the threat of having our heads cut off.
Gosh,
because
that's pretty drastic.
Yes. So actually my parents would have stayed there longer had they had the chance. So.
Did you have any brothers or sisters with you, or you were on your own?
So there were 2 of us siblings that went out initially. My brother, who's 2 years older than me. My younger sister was born when we were there. And I have got a younger brother, but he was born back in England.
Right, okay. But he never went to Africa then?
No.
No. Okay. So growing up in Africa must have been very exciting. Can you tell us a bit about that?
It was. I was home tutored. So unfortunately England didn't do any distance courses when I was growing up, so they were all American. We only had a couple of hours 3 times a week, and the church actually flew a tutor out to specifically teach us. Some of my favourite memories, so on a Thursday morning I'd wake up about 5 in the morning and we would drive to Ouagadougou where we would sell the vegetables from the farm. And then we'd pick up all of the provisions we would need for the students, such as bread, coffee, milk. And there would be a whole day where I would spend half of it swimming in the pool in the Hotel Independence. And my father was very kind and bought us Fanta. And I always came back cherry red from sunburn because, of course, we didn't have sun creams then. No. I learned to drive a car. We had them to go around the compound. Some other memories I have of there are going to witch doctors, not actually going to them, but going past their huts, because the smell was horrific, but they were very commonly used by people there.
And I believe you had a very early encounter with God, didn't you?
I did. My parents used to tell me how they were speaking to God and what God was saying to them. And I would say, Lord, I really want to have an encounter with you. I want to speak to you. I want to communicate with you. And very shortly afterwards, I began speaking this language that I didn't know at the time, but was actually tongues, as I found out later on in my life. And I didn't realise at the time that he'd given me a special gift. So I was a bit miffed, actually, and realised I didn't think he had started communicating with me, but I understand now the gift of tongues is for us to communicate to God.
Yes.
So at that point in time, it was more of a one-way street, the Spirit communicating.
Did you ever find out if it was an actual language in use or whether it was some kind of heavenly language?
Well, the reason I know that that was tongues is because when I did become a Christian, I hungered and thirsted to speak in tongues. And it was really only after I read a book called They Speak with Other Tongues. And in there they said, if you had a language as a child, then that often can be tongues given to you as a child, especially if it was associated with wanting to know God. And then I thought, oh, I can do that. And I still had, the tongue. So I believe it is very much a heavenly tongue.
So you say that your parents said to you regularly they were in communication with God.
Yes.
What sort of things were they telling you?
So they would say, we've prayed and we've asked God whether we should go to this village or that village, or we prayed and we asked God, the drums that are happening out at night, are they going to come and attack us? But God said it would be fine. Or I had this sense of peace, that everything was going to be all right, or God's told us that we have to go to this village. And so that was the kind of communication that I was aware of and wanted very much.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. Yes. Now, I also understand that a bit later on in your life, you had quite some involvement with drugs, didn't you? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I came back from Africa and I really didn't like the British culture. I didn't understand materialism and I didn't fit. So I started looking elsewhere for people to fit in with, and actually those people that took drugs were the ones I felt most comfortable with, because they didn't really care what you wore and they didn't think anything of whether you did or didn't have a brand name.
Right.
And the other thing was that my brother came home one night and he said, oh, I've got some weed. And I said, oh, well, let me try that. And so I had a spliff, and this was at the age of 14, and something clicked in my head and I thought, this is the solution. And I didn't understand what it was the solution to, because I didn't really understand I had a problem. But there was a big problem, and this was evidenced shortly afterwards, because at the age of 16 I left home. I ran away from home more because I actually met this boy who came round, shared a whole load of drugs with me one evening that I was actually babysitting for a lady, and she came home and I was incoherent, and the next morning my father was absolutely enraged. So I was so afraid I tried to kill myself.
Right.
And when I woke up in the hospital, I thought, I can't stay at home. So very shortly afterwards, I actually moved out of home and threw up a scholarship to a posh school. And I lived with this young man in a flat in horrendous circumstances, taking as many drugs as I could get hold of, really.
I believe a certain Bible verse turned your life around, didn't it?
It did. I was 25 years old. By this time I had met another person who, I became pregnant literally a month after meeting them. And so at this point I had a 2-year-old child, and I really couldn't handle the thought of life anymore. I knew I was trapped. I knew that the drugs was a trap that I could never get myself out of. So I was injecting, I was taking every kind of drug I could possibly get my hands on. And I decided I was going to kill myself, and this time I would be successful. So that night I'd gone to bed thinking, this is how I'm going to do it. and I was going to save up the drugs that I got from the doctor on prescription and go and hide in a hedge and take them in the morning about 3 o'clock when nobody would ever find me. And then I was woken up about 4 in the morning, and I had an impulse to open the Bible. And
so you had the Bible with you?
Well, my mother had brought me one literally that week, and I had this impulse. I had to go and open the Bible. So I opened the Bible up, and this verse was, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your soul." And I just fell on the floor crying, because I knew I needed this rest. I needed this help. I needed to be looked after, and I wasn't doing a very good job of it. So I fell on the floor crying, and I cried for about an hour. But when I got off the floor, everything was different. Everything was different. I had met with the Lord Jesus, and I wasn't the same person. It's been a long journey. It's been a very long journey since then. But now I have freedom. I have healing. I have life, and I have it abundantly.
Nice. Praise God.
Yeah.
How did healing prayer help you?
So I didn't actually have any healing prayer until I was about 34. So I'd been a Christian for about 10 years before I had healing prayer. And after the first session, I knew that there were deeper issues than I had actually ever really known about before. So I asked God, I said, what is it about this lack of healing I have? Why is it that I can't kick every single habit completely just like that? You know, I wanted to be free. And that's when it was actually revealed to me through flashbacks that I had been abused as a child. And I went back for more healing prayer, and that was where the real breakthrough happened.
This abuse, was that something that took place in Africa?
It was. There was an African boy who had actually interfered with me, and I had been far too ashamed to have even said anything to my father about it, knowing how he felt about the whole issue of sexuality, you know, the Christian moral code. Yeah,
interesting. So what's your life like now, and how are you living in the light of everything you've experienced?
Now I appreciate so much what Jesus Christ has done for me. There were so many times along the way where I just didn't think that I would ever be free. I didn't understand what Jesus did at the cross. I didn't understand it was done for me. I thought that that's what other people got. And I didn't realize the day would come when I could truly say, I am free and free indeed. The truth has set me free. And the truth is a person, and that is the person of Jesus Christ.
Yes. And you now got your own ministry in effect, haven't you?
I do minister. I've done a few things. I feel very called to help people who are trapped in addiction. But in the meantime, I do teach the Bible, because the Bible is the ultimate tool to free people. And with a friend of mine, Sarah, we do minister to people. And I recall this when I sitting there teaching people the Bible. I remember being a shepherdess and feeding this little flock of sheep, and think, yes, Lord, that is, in fact, you know, what you were speaking to me about doing in the future, and I'm doing it now.
Can you give any examples of anybody that you've helped, you know, generally since you started this up?
Yes, there was a young lad who I knew from many years ago, who came to see my son, and that morning he left the house, and I thought, he's left the house with great purpose for someone with no job. And I found out later on in the day he'd actually tried to jump in front of a train. He'd left my house and tried to jump in front of a train. And I said to him, I saw him later, and after his mum had spoken to me, and I said, why don't you come and stay with me and I'll help you get free from drugs. So he was on drugs, he was on probation, he was on benefits, and he was homeless. And he came to live with me for a year, and it's great. He rang me the other day, you know, he's just got his own flat, he's got his own job, and he hasn't finished his journey, and he hasn't actually accepted Christ properly, but he's very much on the way. So that's one story of many to come, I hope.
Yes, indeed. So obviously your experiences were a great help in a situation like that, because you obviously related to a lot of the problems and things he was encountering with the drugs and
very much so.
On.
And I understand that the process of coming off drugs isn't just about stopping the drugs. It's about being healed. It's about taking you out of that situation where you know people who take drugs, because people justify themselves by other people being around doing the same thing very much. And also it's that understanding that there's a holistic way that needs to be addressed with drugs, and that involves the spiritual, medical and psychological, and just knowing you're safe, knowing you're loved. It's a very important part of it.
Do you think that the devil is at the back of a lot of these drug addictions that people have?
I believe very much so. It's a spiritual ill. But I think that spiritual ill comes in through many different ways. So it's not just a spiritual problem. It will come through abuse. It will come through pain, emotional brokenness, and psychological ill health. And so then it takes root, and definitely the spiritual element is undeniable. I mean, it really is evil at its root. It really is. Yeah.
And I'm just intrigued about your parents now. I mean, did they ever see this transformation that occurred in your life? And if they did, what was their view?
Well, my mother very faithfully witnessed to me all the time, and she used to come and bring me food in the very darkest of days. And I can truly say that she taught me what unconditional love is. And I'm very, very happy to know that the very last thing my mum saw before she sadly passed away, well, moved to heaven, should we put it, was me graduating from university with sociology and criminology as one of the final steps in my healing. My father also very much did come round. He was very disappointed in me to begin with, but he does see that my life has completely turned around. Yeah. And
what about your brothers and sisters? Do you have any contact with them, and what's that like now?
I get on very well with most of my brothers and sisters. My older brother and I still have a little sibling rivalry left there, but my younger brother and sister were very aware of how difficult things were for my parents and for me, and they in fact, I've led both of them to the Lord, and I've even baptized my younger brother, so that's been great for them to see over time.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And you said that your parents were involved with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, didn't you?
Yes. So they actually went out to Africa with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and a lot of people think they're a bit strange in that they worship on the Sabbath, the Saturday. I personally, I felt that the very word-based faith, they just lack the balance of spirit. However, I think that there are a lot a lot of different people out there in terms of denomination, but doctrinally they're reasonably sound. Actually, there's a very legalistic side to it, and I must say that was and has been one of my problems, condemnation. But I think that's quite common the world over, actually, just to condemn yourself. Yeah.
So, having been through all of these life experiences, dramatic ones for that matter, what sort of advice can you offer to people who, perhaps young people who are in this situation currently, or, you know, dabbling in areas like this?
Be aware. The son that I had was dabbling in drugs, and very sadly passed away in December from dabbling with drugs. See, God can actually redeem you. He can. But at the same time, you have to understand the redemptive power of God is great, and yet the rebellion of man is equally great. And so God was kind enough and graceful enough to redeem me. But don't take it for granted that you can just get away with it. My son wasn't an addict. He didn't, he didn't really, you wouldn't look at him and say, oh, here's someone that takes drugs. He just played on the rave scene. He went out and partied all night. But he worked during the week. He was a perfectly normal young man. And then one night someone came home and said to him, why don't you take these? And sadly he never woke up. And it's very sad, because he was only 22. Oh my gosh. And he had his whole life ahead. But the great thing is that he did accept Jesus as his saviour. Wow. And
that's a great relief.
It is, because I know it's just a question of time, rather than do I see him again. But it's a lot of life to lose. We only have one.
Absolutely.
And as much as I didn't value mine, I understand the value of life a lot more now that I've been given mine back.
Yes. Was he aware of your background, or did you keep it from him?
No, he was very aware of my background, and that's another one of the ironies, that actually he actually always said, oh, I'm not going to make the mistakes you made. So and I did have a conversation with him very shortly before this, and I said to him, you can't just play around and expect to get away with what you're doing forever. And he said, oh, New Year's Eve, I will consecrate my life properly to the Lord. Just let me go one more rave, Mum, one more rave. And 2 weeks later, he was dead. Dear.
That must have been very difficult, to say the least. I mean, it could have pushed you back over the edge, couldn't it?
It would have been possible if I hadn't learned to absolutely hate drugs with a passion. And hate the whole spiritual forces that are behind it. I couldn't go back there now, because what I have with Jesus is so sweet. It doesn't even tempt me anymore. No,
that's wonderful. So this ministry that you've started is in its infancy, really, isn't it? How do you see it progressing and growing?
Well, I feel very much that in time, my vision is to have a clinic where I can actually have people come and stay, and it would be rehab, but it would be a fusion of spiritual, psychological and medical help. Because it's very easy to say to people, I'll just stop taking things and I'll pray with you, and that does work. But for some people that's kind of scary. And if they're very mentally broken, or they've been abused or even tortured in war, or any of those sorts of things, there's a lot more to the healing than just stopping taking the drugs. So that's the big vision for the future. Right now, just one person will do. We've had one more, step at a time.
One step at a time. Yes, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is word beginning to spread about the work you're doing?
At this moment in time, it hasn't. The kind of help that we're doing is with much lower level problems. But we're seeing great changes in people's lives, just praying with them. You know, I do have some people that I'm trying to help at the moment who are very alcoholic, and just spending time with them, supporting them, giving them hope for the future is making a difference in their lives. And sadly, with this kind of problem, people will take 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of frustrating, but you have to hang in there. My journey was 20 years long.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a lifetime's experience, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And you're passing that on now. Is there anything else that you'd like to just finish on and pass on to the viewers in terms of where to go from here?
Well, I do want to start a charity in memory of my son.
Yeah.
I just want to warn youngsters, you know, that they don't want to waste their lives and throw it away just for what they perceive to be a night of fun, because that fun may prove to be deadly.